Molly always had a passion for children, which is why she intentionally pursued a career in education. After graduating from university, she landed a job teaching language and literature at a school. Her students adored her because she consistently made an effort to present the material in an engaging way, and she excelled at it. By the time she turned 25, she had already established herself as one of the best teachers in the city, and she felt a great sense of pride about it. However, her personal life was not thriving. None of her suitors piqued her interest, and she didn't see any promising prospects for her future. That all changed one day at a local literary meeting when she met a wonderful and sensitive young man named Edward. Their friendship blossomed gradually, and Molly found herself falling in love with him. Edward was attentive, uplifting, and romantic, a true prince straight out of a fairy tale. He even wrote poetry for her and proposed in the classic style of knights. One night, he sang a serenade beneath her window, kneeling on one knee. Of course, Molly couldn't refuse, nor did she want to. They got married, but while preparing for the wedding, an unfortunate situation arose. Edward was currently without a job. He was busy working on his own collection of poems, which he hoped to sell to a publishing house in the future. "I guess we'll have to scale back on the wedding ceremony," Molly sighed. "No. What are you talking about?" Edward's eyes filled with alarm. "How can we do that? There's only one wedding, and it must be beautiful. Just think, once I finish my book, any publishing house will snatch it up, and we'll be sitting on sacks of money. But there isn't much time left, so we shouldn't worry too much about finances," Molly replied. "What's wrong with loans? Everyone does it now." Edward shrugged. "We'll pay it back in no time. Just a couple of payments and I'll cover the rest." "Well, if you're so certain about it," Molly sighed, reluctantly agreeing to her fiancé's plan. "Of course I'm certain," he smiled, running his hand gently over her cheek. "You're such a beauty. I'd do anything for you." Molly felt delighted, but she didn't realize that Edward was willing to do anything for her only if it meant taking out a loan in her name. After all, he was unemployed, and no one would give him any money. So, everything was decided. They held a lavish wedding and ended up in debt. Naturally, Molly's family did not support such a choice and tried to talk her out of it, but she had already envisioned the perfect wedding and remained firm against all reasonable arguments. "This is my wedding. Can't I indulge in something luxurious just once in my life?" No one could object. Thus, the ceremony unfolded as the bride and groom had envisioned. They were set to embark on their honeymoon by the sea. But then the bank denied their loan application. So instead of Greece, they had to settle for Egypt. The tickets were purchased by Molly's relatives. Edward was upset that they couldn't visit Greece and grumbled throughout their entire vacation. On the other hand, Molly did her best to relax and enjoy the trip. She understood that their newly formed family would be primarily supported by her fragile shoulders for now. But she reassured herself that this situation wouldn't last long. Upon their return home, Molly immediately went back to work. Edward moved in with her, as he had lived with his mother before and didn't have his own place. "This is all temporary. We will definitely have a big house one day," Molly thought to herself. However, things became complicated when the bank required regular payments. Her husband didn't demand fancy meals or a spotless home, yet Molly struggled to keep up with everything. Eventually, it became clear that she couldn't manage everything on her own. "Listen, when are you going to finish your book?" Molly asked somewhat irritably. Edward pulled himself away from his laptop, where he had been watching a series, and gazed at his wife with unmistakable irritation. With one hand, she stirred the soup in the pot, while with the other, she flipped the cutlets. "It's art, Molly. It takes time. I don't have the inspiration to write, and I can't just whip it up at the snap of my fingers," he replied. "Maybe you should consider getting a job then," Molly suggested. Edward was so taken aback that he was silent for almost a minute, blinking in disbelief. "What do you mean? Should I, a poet, work as a longshoreman?" "Oh no. Why a longshoreman?" Molly asked, covering the pot with a lid and turning to face her husband. For example, there's an opening for a fine arts teacher. I don't have a teaching degree to work with children, Edward grumbled. Besides, I don't recognize any art except poetry. The scribbles kids make will just irritate me further. We have a private school. I think I can arrange for you to be accepted without a teaching degree, at least for a few hours a week, Molly continued, ignoring his excuses. You have an art history degree. I think that would work for teaching. Do you even hear me? Edward exploded. I don't want to look at the scribbles your students create, let alone grade them. I'm a poet, not an artist. Even if I were an artist, I couldn't stand school children's drawings. Everyone has to start somewhere, Molly replied calmly. Sure, the kids draw poorly, but you'll be able to work and help me pay off the loan. Oh, I see, Edward sneered. You need money? Of course. Everyone needs money, she shot back, feeling frustrated. You don't appreciate love, care, and tenderness. You know what, Edward? Molly exclaimed, throwing the spoon into the sink in exasperation. Where is the love and care you have for me? You could help out around the house for once. I work at school, clean at home, cook lunch, go grocery shopping, and you just pretend to be busy. I work, Edward retorted, his face turning crimson. Where's the result? Molly crossed her arms defiantly and added, If you're a poet, show me your latest poem. Edward fell silent and stared at his hands. In that moment, Molly felt a twinge of sympathy for him. After all, he was a creative and sensitive individual, and she knew who she had married. So, why was she shouting now? I understand you, Molly, Edward said just as she was about to apologize. All right, I'll ask about the job opening. I'll work at your school just so you don't feel so overwhelmed. It took great effort for Molly to remain silent. She turned away from her husband. The next day, as she returned to preparing dinner, she found a free moment to visit the principal's office at the school and discuss Edward. Molly spent half an hour extolling the virtues of her wonderful husband, emphasizing how much he loved children and how brilliant he was as an art historian. It didn't matter that he wrote poetry. He had a deep understanding of all the arts and would excel in the role. I see, the school director replied with a smile. Children really do need a good teacher. Of course, it would be better if he had a degree. Our previous employee left 6 months ago, and there hasn't been anyone to teach drawing to the kids. Well, let's take a closer look at your husband. For now, we can put him on a trial period of 2 weeks, and then we'll make it official. Oh, thank you so much. Molly beamed. It's no trouble at all. Can he start tomorrow? Of course he can. Molly nodded enthusiastically. Great. We'll be waiting for him. By the way, Molly, you have such a knack for teaching. Have you ever considered working as a tutor on the side? Many parents have asked for private lessons for their children, and they specifically want you. Oh, this is so unexpected and very, very nice, Molly smiled. I'd be happy to do it. Wonderful. I'll give out your contact information. It's a pleasure to talk and work with you, Tatiana praised. Thank you, Molly replied. I'm glad to be part of your school. Molly returned home feeling elated. Now Edward could earn money, and she could finally breathe a little easier. Edward received the news about his job with the philosophical wisdom and humility of a monk. Okay, he stated flatly, listening to Molly's enthusiastic account. I'll go watch one more episode. Such behavior was incomprehensible and hurtful to Molly. She was trying her best for their family, taking on an additional part-time job and helping him secure a position at her school instead of doing something labor-intensive. Yet he still seemed dissatisfied. Well, maybe he's just upset about the lack of money, she thought. Of course, this is just a tough period. As Edward started going to work, he displayed clear reluctance to be there. Molly had to kick him out of bed each morning, scolding and shouting throughout the apartment just to get him to wake up and begrudgingly start his day. Molly felt that this couldn't go on for much longer. But then, surprisingly, Edward began to enjoy working. He started waking up without the need for shouting and stopped being late. Soon, the director decided to keep him on staff permanently. Molly's joy was boundless. It seemed Edward had also begun to work on his book again. At least he was typing something on his laptop and jotting down notes in his notebook. Molly didn't ask any questions to avoid distracting him, nor did she have the time to. The director wasn't joking when she said that many parents wanted Molly as a tutor. 15 families expressed interest in studying with her. Somehow, Molly managed to schedule all of them for every workday. Of course, there was only one session per week for each child, but it was still better than nothing. Parents remarked that they were genuinely surprised by the number of people wanting additional lessons. Feeling it would be rude to refuse, Molly found herself spinning like a hamster in a wheel every morning. She'd finish grading homework, rush off to school for lessons, and then dash to students' homes. Molly had no fewer than 2 tutoring sessions each day, even on Saturdays. On her days off, she cleaned the house, bought groceries, and tried to prepare as many meals as possible. Sundays often felt like a blur. She spent them grading student assignments, creating syllabi, and collapsing into bed completely drained. Molly lost interest in the things that once brought her joy. Her irregular and unhealthy diet left her feeling deprived of pleasure in life. Soon, she began experiencing skin and weight problems due to sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Her hair started to fall out, her nails became brittle, and huge bags formed under her eyes. Pain spread throughout her body, and no painkillers seemed to alleviate it. Eventually, she also developed kidney issues. In short, she was in terrible shape. After a year of living like this, Molly had become unrecognizable to her old acquaintances. She looked like a ghost. However, she felt powerless to change her circumstances, as she was still paying off the debt. Edward never learned how to earn a decent income, which meant she had to continue working tirelessly. One Sunday, during her day off, Edward approached her while she lay staring at the ceiling. "Molly, we need to talk," he said with a dramatic sigh. "What's wrong?" Molly asked, indifferent. "You know, things have definitely changed lately," Edward began. "You're not the same person anymore. You've stopped enjoying life and have buried yourself in your work. You don't notice anything happening around you. And by the way, the most important things are happening right in front of you. You didn't even notice how often I'm not at home. Or do you not care? I can't live like this anymore. I didn't marry such a girl, so I'm filing for divorce." Molly smiled, or perhaps it was more of a snort. "Go ahead. I knew you were going to say that. Are you really not going to fight for our relationship?" Edward asked in shock. "There's nothing to fight for," Molly said, turning away and signaling that the conversation was over. She felt no sadness at the thought of her husband leaving her forever. Deep down, she knew he had a mistress, more than one in fact. Rumors from colleagues hinted that the physical education teacher had often been seen in Edward's company. Once, Molly opened Edward's notebook, which was filled with love poems, and discovered that all the poems were dedicated to a certain Melanie, who coincidentally worked as the girl's physical education teacher. It was at that moment that Molly realized why her husband suddenly became more active at school. Yet, by that time, she was so exhausted from her life that she simply didn't want to arrange a confrontation. Molly chose to divorce Edward. Her relatives helped her fully pay off the loan, and then they gathered for a family council. At this meeting, it was decided that Molly would either leave her job at the school or resign from her tutoring work because the situation simply couldn't continue as it was. Molly agreed. First of all, she felt indifferent to everything, and secondly, she realized she was utterly exhausted. It would be very convenient for her to finish tutoring or at least refuse several children who didn't truly need classes. Finally, Molly found herself with a little spare time in her life. One day, while cleaning the house, she stood frozen in front of the mirror. Horrified, she took in her reflection. At just 27, she looked like she was 40. Extra weight, bags under her eyes, thin hair, and brittle nails. Molly was in shock. It became clear why her husband had quickly moved on to another girl. Determined to make a change, she decided to sign up for a gym and a beauty salon, as well as a music school to make life a bit less dull. She had some free time and money now, so she could afford it. After a year of working hard on herself, Molly began to see results. The extra weight had disappeared, her skin had cleared up, and her hair was a bit thicker. She was also improving her musical skills. Yet, despite these positive changes, she constantly felt tired, irritated, and dissatisfied. Nevertheless, this didn't stop her from meeting Michael. This time, her boyfriend was hardworking and even helped her around the house. Molly was overjoyed when he proposed to her, especially since she wouldn't have to take out a loan. Michael decided to pay for the wedding himself. A year later, Molly became pregnant and went on maternity leave. Michael was happy and took great care of his wife. While Molly adored her husband and was already loving their future child, she still faced many challenges. Her pregnancy was difficult, requiring her to be hospitalized 3 times. The doctor monitoring her condition was perplexed, as all her tests showed only minor deviations from the norm. They collected her medical history thoroughly. But what could possibly go wrong? Tell me, have you ever experienced a lack of energy? Irritability? Maybe your hair has fallen out, or you've had problems with your skin or internal organs? The consulting gynecologist asked Molly skeptically after yet another hospitalization. Yes, I've experienced that, she admitted. But at that time, I was working a lot on my relationship with my ex-husband, which was worse than you can imagine. So, I think it was all due to stress. Well, let's visit a geneticist, suggested the doctor. Anything can happen, and we don't want to take unnecessary risks with the baby. Everything looks fine on the ultrasound, but don't panic just yet. I could be wrong. You might just have an atypical pregnancy. Obstetrics and gynecology can be quite unpredictable, and not everything follows the textbook. Yes, I understand. I'll try not to get too anxious, Molly agreed. The woman received a referral to a specialist, whom she visited a couple of days later. Molly had to endure some uncomfortable procedures, including taking the baby's blood through the umbilical cord. Finally, the results were ready. Accompanied by Michael, Molly attended the geneticist's consultation. Let's start with the good news, the geneticist said, glancing at Molly's chart. Those words immediately shattered whatever fragile hope she had left that everything would be fine. Your baby is healthy. Thank God, Molly exclaimed as Michael squeezed her hand. And the bad news? He asked, his expression turning serious. The bad news is, Molly, that you have a rare genetic disease called Fabry disease, the doctor explained. It's a progressive condition, meaning you'll need intensive treatment, and it's uncertain whether you'll be able to overcome all the symptoms. Molly sat quietly, trying not to cry. Why was this happening to her? What had she done in her life to deserve such punishment? I understand that the situation seems dire, the doctor sighed. But with modern treatment methods, it is possible to slow down the disease's progression, and you will live a long life. You will receive ongoing enzyme replacement therapy that should nearly eliminate the symptoms, including the pain and kidney issues you've been experiencing. Fortunately, your daughter is healthy. She did not inherit the faulty gene. However, I advise against having more children after leaving the clinic. At this, Molly allowed herself to cry freely. She had always dreamed of a big family, but now she was grateful that her only daughter wouldn't suffer from any genetic condition. However, Molly would have to undergo therapy for the rest of her life. Michael tried to support his wife, but Molly spiraled into depression. Even the birth of a healthy child couldn't alleviate her state. She had to start treatment immediately, and they had to buy expensive formula for their daughter, which distressed both parents. When their daughter Amy turned 1, Michael couldn't take it anymore. Molly, I'm sorry, but I can't tolerate this any longer, he said, his voice shaking. I keep worrying that Amy might have some abnormalities. I just can't face that. Forgive me. No, please. Not you. Tears welled in Molly's eyes. Forgive me, Michael repeated, covering his face with his hands. Forgive me, but I don't want a family with defects. Molly was left bewildered by the divorce. If it hadn't been for her mother moving in to help with the child, she wouldn't have coped. The woman lay and cried for days, while her mother took care of both Amy and Molly. Life felt like more than just a difficult period. It was as if the whole world had turned into a massive black hole, sucking away Molly's strength with every passing second. Then, Amy began experiencing allergies, and they had to switch to more expensive baby food, which Molly's family could barely afford. Molly had to return to work, but everything slipped through her fingers. Her beloved students didn't recognize their teacher, prompting the director to call Molly in for a serious talk. "Molly, what's happening to you?" the director asked directly. "I'm just exhausted," Molly admitted. "If you're tired and can't handle the work, maybe it's time to consider a career change," the director suggested. "What are you talking about?" Molly couldn't believe what she was hearing. The director sighed. "There have been complaints about you. If they continue, I'll have to let you go. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you need to pull yourself together. I understand you're going through a tough time, but the children shouldn't have to suffer because of it. Please understand me." "I understand," Molly sighed as she exited the director's office, tears streaming down her cheeks. That evening, she decided to go to her mother's house, seeking an environment that wouldn't remind her of her own life. Molly reflected on her childhood. It seemed like just yesterday she was running through those rooms, playing hide and seek with her mother, and now her mother was sitting with her daughter, waiting for Molly to return. Now, she faced an incurable disease and had to undergo another round of 4 treatments. Biting her lip to hold back tears, she approached the old piano, a family heirloom, and poured her heartache into a melody. After playing, she lingered at the piano for a few minutes, reconciling herself to her fate. There was nothing she could do. She had to get treatment and return to the nightmare where there was no money, no love, and no hope. Although, why was there no love? Molly shook herself from these thoughts. Amy, her daughter, gave her strength and motivation to keep living. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted her musings. Startled, she approached to open it. "Who's there?" Molly asked from behind the door. "Excuse me, I'm your new neighbor. I recently bought a flat here," came a man's voice. "I heard the piano and wanted to know what that melody was." Molly opened the door while keeping the chain in place. The man at the door appeared non-threatening. He was mature, but looked to be in his 30s. There were flecks of gray in his hair, which somehow made him look younger. "Sorry to bother you," Molly said. "Bother you?" "No, not at all." The man smiled. "I would love to hear more, but I couldn't recognize the composer." "You liked it?" Molly was surprised. "Madly," he replied with a grin. "So, who's the composer?" "Well, me." Molly shrugged uncertainly. "Wow." The man's eyes widened. "You have real talent. You know, I'm a music producer. I hear countless musicians every day, but nothing ever really touches me, except for this. I can't even find the words. Could you please play something else? If you're shy to perform in front of me, I can listen from my flat." Molly smiled and stepped back into her apartment without hesitation. "Please come in." After listening to several of Molly's pieces, James, the producer, spent the next few days encouraging her to sign a contract and record her works. Finally, Molly felt she had nothing to lose and decided to go for it. With James's support, Molly flourished over the next 2 years. She transformed into a well-known performer and composer, with her music featured in theaters, operas, and musicals. Molly no longer needed to teach. She had a stable income from various agencies and contracts. James had fallen in love with her, and she decided to enter into a third marriage, which turned out to be genuinely happy. He loved Amy as if she were his own daughter, and since Amy didn't know her biological father, she quickly began calling James Dad, which delighted the producer. From that point on, Molly lived happily, feeling less uncomfortable about taking her medication and receiving infusions. The symptoms of her disease no longer troubled her. Once, during one of her concerts, Molly noticed Edward in the audience. He watched her with admiration, but she felt indifferent. She played her symphony, bowed to the audience, and amid thunderous applause, made her way backstage where her husband and daughter awaited her. Brilliant as always, James smiled and kissed his wife. "Molly, an admirer came to see you. He introduced himself as your ex-husband." One of the guards informed her. Wow, Molly smiled. Let him come. Oh, Molly, lovely Molly, Edward exclaimed, showering her with compliments. Although I didn't appreciate any art except poetry, you were simply magnificent. I'm truly impressed and amazed. Thank you, Molly replied coolly. Did you want to talk about something? I don't have much time. Oh, I understand, Edward smiled. It must be dizzying. Fame, mountains of money, crowds of fans. But it doesn't matter. I'll be brief. He cleared his throat and got down on one knee. Dear Molly, please agree to be with me again. Oh, stop. Molly interrupted. That's how your ballad began, followed by a marriage proposal. I've heard this before. It seems we got divorced. Yes, but so what? Edward shrugged. It's never too late to start anew. You let yourself go back then, and I had to leave. I couldn't be with someone who had let themselves become unattractive. But now you're beautiful. I always knew you had it in you. It was just a difficult period. And you left me, she retorted sharply. You left me because I was ugly during a tough time. What a chivalrous act. Molly, you have to understand, Edward pleaded. I've forgiven you. Molly raised her eyebrows in disbelief and then burst out laughing. You forgave me? Oh, I can't listen to this anymore. All right, Edward, get up and stop fooling around. Go to your angelic physical education teacher and don't bother me again. But Molly, I love only you, he insisted, grasping her dress. Besides, she's not my type at all. Did she refuse to support you? I'm a poet, Edward exclaimed, offended. I can't work hard in factories. I was born to create, to write. I need inspiration every day. You know you're lying about everything, Molly shot back. I'm an artist now too, and I have inspiration every day. It comes from my beloved husband and my precious daughter. Someone like you only needs to be supported and allowed to do nothing. I would never have married you if I had truly understood your nature. Let's end it here. I wish you all the best, Molly, Edward said, trying to chase after her, but James stepped in his path. Okay, enough of this circus. Get out of here, or I'll call the police and send your gentle poet's soul to jail for harassment. Just imagine the clientele of that place. Edward quickly abandoned his attempt to gain her attention and left the backstage area as abruptly as he had arrived. You had terrible taste, James grinned. Well, I'm glad I've improved it, Molly replied with a smile, kissing her husband.